Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous, and today we will dive into Trump's latest comments on the Israel-Gaza ceasefire. United States President Donald Trump has proposed cleaning out Gaza by relocating its population to neighbouring countries. Speaking aboard Air Force One, he urged Egypt and Jordan to accept displaced Palestinians, calling Gaza a real mess. Trump spoke with Jordan's King Abdullah and planned to engage with Egypt's President el-Sisi. His remarks have drawn sharp criticism, with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad condemning the proposal as incitement of war crimes. Scholars warn Trump's comments could raise tensions amid reports of massive displacement and devastation in Gaza. Meanwhile, Trump lifted a ban on 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, justifying the move as a fulfilled purchase deal. We will be discussing more on this topic. I am joined by my guests, Raymond Vickery, former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce in Washington, Professor Ephraim Imbar, President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, live from Jerusalem, and Mohammed El-Dashan, Director at Oxcon Fragile States Consulting from London, and Daniel Wagner, CEO of Country Risk Solutions from Portland. Mohammed, I wanted to come to you first to start this conversation. Trump's proposal, he says that this relocation could be temporary or long-term. What are the practical and moral differences between a short-term evacuation and permanent displacement?
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think the mere fact that this is actually being discussed is quite insane. We should not have to convince the world and the audience that, genocide is wrong, ethnic cleansing is wrong. You do not get to move people from their homes to neighboring countries at will. This is fundamentally inhumane and goes against every single human rights convention. It is also equally untenable. Politically speaking, politically speaking, he is leaning heavily for that plan on his closest Middle Eastern allies, Egypt and Jordan, whose leadership and population would not take kindly to anything that crazy. And then, of course, there's the idea of moving 2 million people from their homes to a neighboring country against their will because somehow it's a mess. Yes, it is a mess because there's been a genocide, and we should be investing in rebuilding it rather than telling people to go to the neighboring country. So the thing is, the insanity of the proposal unfortunately needs to be considered just because it's coming from people who actually have the ability and the willingness to inflict massive harm on civilians, and that is deeply unfortunate. But it's not feasible, and pushing towards that, trying to implement that in any way, shape, or form will only lead to further violence and bloodshed. So.
Daniel Wagner, decades of US foreign policy aimed for a Palestinian state, including Gaza, but obviously Prime Minister Netanyahu rejects that idea. Does Trump's relocation plan signal a shift in US thinking away from a two-state solution?
Well, as usual, Trump has spoken with the subtlety of a Mack truck. But on the other hand, he has also said in the past that we don't have time for being politically correct on any number of issues in America and around the world. So he can be criticized for putting it on the table, but for me, it boils down to a simple question, and that is, what is the alternative? I mean, Gaza is in ruins. The Palestinian people are suffering greatly by staying there. It would take many years to rebuild Gaza, even if the hundreds of billions of dollars of aid that would be required could be secured. So what is the alternative? Hamas is still in place. The chance of a political solution is simply untenable. Hamas said absolutely, they don't want a political solution. There are parties in Israel that do and don't want it. So, I find myself wondering, what is the alternative? Do the Palestinians want to continue living in this squalor, this dreadful situation? And do we want to be in a situation where we rinse and repeat and eventually, Hamas reconstitutes itself and another round of fighting continues? I'm not sure what the alternative is. So does it constitute a change in U.S. policy? Certainly it does. And certainly we should expect that from the Trump administration. On the other hand, if it gets the wheels turning and gets the neighboring states and other parties thinking about what else can be done, I view the idea of talking about alternative solutions as a good thing. Now, Jordan and Egypt have already said that's a red line for them. They don't want to accept more Palestinian refugees. As we know, there are almost as many Palestinians in Jordan as there are in Gaza itself. So I don't think that arm twisting by Trump is likely to result in Egypt and in Jordan simply saying, okay, we'll do it. It's not going to work.
Raymond Vickery, Hamas leader Bassem Naim insists that Gazans will not accept any offers or solutions involving leaving Gaza. They have, after all, seen 50 months of war on their land. Why is staying in their ancestral land so important to Gazans, and what does this mean for any relocation plan?
Well, thanks for having me. I think that one has to look at this in the bigger picture. And that is that there has been hope that in spite of all the bluster, that Trump would act as a peacemaker and bringing peace to wars not only with Gaza, but Ukraine and so forth. Unfortunately, President Trump's approach is not compatible with long-term peace in this regard. As you point out, Palestinians rightly have a great attachment to their own homeland and their own land. It is not promoting peace to say that we ought to have ethnic cleansing to take them out of that place where they have their homes. It only provokes further violence and further discontinuities in building peace to do that. Unfortunately, it's very much in line with President Trump's thinking domestically, and that is an ethnic approach to things, to do away with diversity and inclusion in the United States. So why not just take a people, the Palestinian people, and move them out? Obviously, it ends a two-state solution and does not promote peace overall.
Ephraim Imbar, how do such relocation ideas affect Israel's international reputation and its internal debates over Gaza?
It's not Israel, just relocate. First of all, to make it perfectly clear, I think the situation, the dire situation in Gaza is the responsibility of the rule of over 15 years of Hamas. And if Hamas continues, those Palestinians are doomed to poverty, ignorance, and Islamic radicalism. So something must be done about it. I think that Egypt doesn't like the idea. They prefer the situation as it is because they want a sword on Israel's side. We have a peace treaty with them, but they don't want Israel to be too strong. The Jordanians have a Palestinian majority, which they try to dilute. This is why they accepted refugees from Iraq and from Syria. Unfortunately, Palestinians are troubled for the countries around us. And whatever happens in Gaza, we will adjust, and if necessary, we will continue to act militarily in order to put an end to the terrible attacks on Israel. The two-state solution is not available because the Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. They don't want a Jewish state next to them. Doesn't matter what borders.
Mohammed Al-Dashan, I want to move on to the regional and diplomatic relations of these nations next. Trump said he has spoken with Jordan's King Abdullah about taking more Palestinians. Now, as Daniel said earlier, there is a large, there's a vast amount of Palestinians already living in Jordan. How might Jordan's large existing Palestinian refugee population influence its willingness or ability to take in more Palestinians?
Thank you. Well, the two things here, worth saying. Well, regarding Jordan, part of Jordan's population is actually people who were expelled from their homes in Palestine in 1948. So there is an issue of sort of a community balance, shall we say, within Jordan that should not be upset. But talking about allies, there's something interesting that I remember now, is that when forcibly displacing, ethnically cleansing Gazans was raised sometime during the course of last year, the Egyptian president, el-Sisi, actually quipped, well, if they want to move them, why don't they move them to the Negev, within current-day Israel? And I think his point was, if the discourse was that people should be moved temporarily, then fine, move them within Israel. What would that look like? And of course, that wouldn't be acceptable to the Israelis, because the point is to, send people out on a one-way trip, not a temporary anything. So that should very much be underlined, is the context of that. The Israelis are not interested in a two-state solution, or in peace, or in letting the Palestinians live their lives as they should. But the outcome is, the hoped outcome is simply ethnic cleansing, either be killed or expelled. Really, fundamentally, this goes back to fundamental human rights. These are people who live in their homes, should be allowed to live in their homes, and the international community should support them. I've lived in my current house for a few years. I would not take kindly to someone trying to kick me out of it, let alone out of my city, out of my country. So that is the context that this entire conversation is happening within. There should be room, nonetheless. I still believe that there's room for peace. I still believe there's room for. I don't think that the Israelis allowed for a two-state solution. I think the settlement planning that they've been going has killed that. Ultimately, it will likely have to be a one-state solution, because we have the option of either pushing for peace or pushing for violence, and it also goes back to what we stand for, and that proposal would simply push, even if it's not implemented, because it cannot be implemented, it will actually push the discourse further and further from the discourse of peace towards the discourse of violence, and that is most unfortunate.
Ephraim Imbar, can I get your direct response to that statement that Mohammed just made about moving the Palestinian people who now don't have a home into some other part of Israel? Ephraim Imbar.
We have enough terrorists. The host unmuted. I think we have enough terrorists on our borders. We've seen it on October 7th, the atrocity committed on Hamas. Does it seem sensible to bring some of those guys into Israel to make them able to commit more atrocities within Israel? Of course we'll refuse such a suggestion. And about the two-state solution, I'm in favor of a two-state solution. I don't understand why settlements are a problem for a two-state solution. Why Jews cannot live in a Palestinian state? What you suggest is a Palestinian or Judenrein state, and this is totally unacceptable. Jews have every right to live every place in the world, particularly in their homeland. And Judea and Samaria is our homeland. And we and the Palestinians are fighting over it. We are ready to make concessions. And you want a Judenrein state, and probably you want one state, as you mentioned, which will bring about the disappearance of Israel. This is not acceptable to me and to most Israelis. We are not ready to live in an authoritarian Palestinian state So we prefer our democratic institutions.
Daniel Wagner, I just wanted to move on to Egypt now. President el-Sisi has firmly rejected any forced displacement into the Sinai Peninsula. What political or security concerns does Egypt have about hosting large numbers of Gazans, and why might it refuse?
Let's not forget that in the 1950s and 60s, Egypt was ruling Palestine. So there is some history there. I think the biggest concern that the Egyptians have right now is the potential instability of their own society and country by taking in hundreds of thousands or millions of Palestinians. As you may know, Egypt is in dire economic straits. It cannot repay its IMF loans. Its security situation is very fragile. So I can't imagine that there would be much incentive there. Now, we can expect that Trump would make future aid to Egypt conditional on doing what he would like, and that may happen. And then, Sisi may have to buckle, we'll see. But the idea that they've also floated, or considered at least, is having a buffer zone inside the Sinai Peninsula, maybe, say, 5 or 10 kilometers, whatever it might be, where some of the Palestinians could reside. One of the things I'd also like to say is that what is not being considered here is the actual will of the Palestinians. Has anyone actually asked them what they would like to do? We're presuming, and there is certainly good cause to presume, that they want to stay in their homeland and they don't want to be removed. Fine, I'm sure many people believe that. But there are also many others who don't like Hamas, who are tired of living in squalor, and who would probably welcome an alternative. They're already living in squalor. If they were moved to a refugee camp, I've got to believe their situation would be somewhat better. That remains to be seen.
Raymond Vickery, the US is the biggest arms supplier to Israel, and some Americans argue weapon sales should stop because of the destruction in Gaza. How might continued US military support to Israel affect diplomatic relations with Arab states that opposed forced relocation?
Well, of course, this whole question of arms supply is fundamental to the relationship. It would be impossible for Israel to conduct the kind of military operations that it has in Gaza, in Lebanon, without that support. So it is very much a part of the picture. So if Trump is serious about trying to bring peace, he's going to have to use the leverage in terms of supply. Israel has a right to defend itself, but that doesn't mean it has the right just to disregard international law, go for ethnic cleansing. And let's be clear about it. If the logic of this is if you can't deal with Hamas, that you're just going to destroy them. That's the language of genocide. That's the language that has been rejected by the world overall. To me, it's very ironic that one of the reasons put forward for this proposal of Trump is that the Gaza Strip is destroyed. It's a reconstruction zone. Well, how did it get destroyed? It got destroyed because of the tactics used to try to counteract Hamas, tactics which have not been successful. The latest headlines are that Hamas is still there. So something needs to be done differently. Trump fancies himself a person who's in real estate and knows how to build and reconstruct. That's the real question here, is how are you going to provide a decent living environment for Palestinians at the same time maintaining the safety of those in Israel. So the idea of just moving people out as really solving anything doesn't. It's the next steps which have to be put into place. What happens in terms of reconstruction? What happens in terms of aid? What happens in terms of a two-state solution or some other solution which does it? There doesn't seem to be giving, Trump doesn't seem to be giving attention to that, and certainly the Israelis are not. It has become might is right, the old-fashioned approach to how people order living together. That isn't gonna work in the long run, and if one hopes that there can be an inflection point and a different approach. But this idea, well, we'll just move them out of Gaza. The next thing is, well, we'll just move them out of the West Bank, and of course that is the prescription for ethnic cleansing in its rawest form.
Mohammed El-Jashan, that reconstruction is exactly what I want to talk about next. Trump has mentioned that Arab nations like Egypt should be involved in the reconstruction of Gaza. How realistic is it for countries like Jordan and Egypt to fund large-scale housing projects in Gaza in the future?
Well, so their involvement of the neighboring countries will come in different ways. If anything, there's the financial, and then there's the practical, right? There's the actual rebuilding. The financial is unlikely to come from the immediate neighbors, just because I do not think that they have the fiscal space to fund or to be a major contributor to this effort. That very much should be a global effort, right? We've had, sadly, over the course of the past 20, 30 years, there have been major reconstruction conferences to rebuild post-war countries, and Gaza very much should be given that kind of attention. Within the Arab region, probably Gulf countries would be the biggest donors. Maybe not the immediate neighbors, who would likely be more involved in terms of the actual work of the reconstruction, using their large, mainly state-owned construction companies and so on. But the cost of the reconstruction, which is very much in the hundreds of billions, I don't think there's a real estimate for that, which itself is a big problem. But that very much should be a global effort. I would say that, the culprits, the party that caused that destruction, should be held liable for that. But it probably isn't very realistic to expect the Israelis to try to fix anything that they've broken. But it is very much the hope that would be an international effort, and that we should all be taking very seriously, and that we should all be advocating for. At this point, the violence has not entirely stopped, but it has calmed down a lot, thankfully, and those people should be allowed to look forward to rebuilding their lives, and they will need global support.
Daniel,
and it's something that will be a certain effort.
Thank you. Daniel Wagner, Trump has ended the hold on £2,000 bombs, saying Israel paid for them and that they've waited a long time for these bombs. What are your thoughts on this? And is there a risk of worsening the humanitarian crisis with this decision from Donald Trump?
Well, I would say whether it becomes worse or not depends on the future actions of Hamas. If Hamas doesn't escalate, I can't imagine that for absolutely no reason, the Israelis are going to resume and they're going to be using those bombs. But in terms of the delivery of the bombs, not a surprise to me, and not a surprise to me that basically Trump has given Bibi, a green light to do what he feels is necessary to control and contain the situation. I wouldn't be surprised if the guardrails that had previously been in place regarding Israel and Iran are also lifted in terms of what Israel might do to try to address the nuclear situation in Iran and future attacks by Iran and its proxies. So I don't see this as anything that was unexpected.
Professor Ephraim Inbar, some Israelis argue that relocating Gaza's population could make Israel more secure. What do you think about this?
I don't think it's very realistic option. So, I don't answer hypothetical questions. I don't think so. I want to say about international support to the Gazans. We see over the years less and less support to the Palestinians because the Palestinians are not ready to help themselves. And, the many demands for a revitalized or reformed Palestinian Authority are falling on deaf ears. Basically, the Palestinians have established a corrupt, dysfunctional entity. In Gaza, they established a similar entity, but with Islamic colors. And I don't think, the world, and particularly not Gulf states, are interested in seeing this type of entity, political entities flourishing. So unless the Palestinians themselves reform themselves and start beginning to behave in a functional way for themselves, I don't think that the tragedy of the Palestinians will end. It is their responsibility to put their house in order. This is the first demand. And of course, to oust Hamas. Unfortunately, 70-80% Palestinians supported the atrocities on October 7th. If this is the type of population, I doubt very much in the near future the Palestinians are capable of establishing a state, of establishing a functional state, a normal democratic state. Forget about it. They are doomed because their own political culture.
Raymond Vickery, my final question. The US has traditionally promoted a negotiated settlement and not a population transfer. If the US were to embrace relocation, how might that impact America's broader regional strategy and reputation?
Well, I think it'll be very, very damaging. The moral strength of the United States has been in subscribing to a rules-based order. The idea that you're just going to transfer a population out of territory and who will control it then? Presumably Israel will. That's of a piece of the 19th century approach to international affairs. Unfortunately, the Trump administration seems to be bringing this back. Threats of using force against Panama or Greenland, the idea that it's all right for a country, whether it be Israel or the United States, to increase its territory by moving other people out or taking it over, is anathema to what has been the leadership role of the United States. As I said earlier, hope springs eternal that the Trump administration can use its disruptive approach to bring peace. But this is not the way. This is not the way to take guards off the use of 2,000-pound bombs to move people out. That's a way which the world tried prior to World War II. And it ended in disaster. And the continued approach in this way will also end in disaster. This is all of a piece of an outlook which the United States apparently is changing. World leadership of the United States, it seems to me, is very much at stake in actions like this.
Thank you very much. We have run out of time. I want to thank all my guests, Raymond Vickery, Professor Imbar, Mohammed El-Dashan, and Daniel Wagner. Thank you very much for joining us. We will keep you updated with more news from across the Middle East. Thank you very much.